Hey there, All Things MSP crew. I'm not prepared because I didn't bring the microphone over here. Wow, was that loud? Sorry. Well, welcome back to another All Things MSP Live. Notice new set. Well, not new set back here, but new virtual set. Trying to, change things up a little bit for the new year. Little neon logo going on here. Trying to do a little bit of a late night vibe here at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Not sure how that works, but hey, we have fun with this show, and that's what it's about. That and being an MSP, being a managed IT service provider, and the non-technical side of being an MSP. Now, a couple of things I wanted to point out tonight before we get started. Number one is that MSP Radio has acquired IT Service Provider University and Carl Palachuk's Small Business Talk. So great assets for Dave Sobel over at MSP Radio to acquire. And really, I know both of these guys really well and have worked with them for well over a decade now. And I think this is a great synergy between the two. They've been friends for a long time. And I know that Dave will take what Carl has done, what Carl has built, and preserve what he's built, but also allow it to have, some additional possibilities as well. So really congratulations to both of these guys. Really do appreciate what they do and what they've done for the industry. And I look forward to what Dave and Carl have to do going forward with these assets. It's really exciting. All right. And then I wanted to give a shout out to Rafi Jamgochin from Triada Networks. He won the finance and banking category from the MSP Titans of the Industry award ceremony about a month ago. And just wanted to highlight that. Rafi's been a good friend of the channel and of the Facebook group. And we actually had a chance to interview him a while ago. And if you want to find that, you can go ahead and search the YouTube channel for that. Remember, the YouTube channel is at All Things MSP. And speaking of things that we do around here, the All Things MSP Facebook group is just eclipsed 6,400 members. And the YouTube channel has just gone over 2,700 subscribers. So if you are interested in seeing more of this content, you can go ahead and join the Facebook group. That's where a lot of the questions happen. That's a great place for you to ask questions as well. And then, of course, the YouTube channel, go ahead and subscribe to that so you don't miss any of the content, including the podcast. So the podcast is something that we typically do weekly. We did take this week off because holidays and everything. I just felt like it was a good time to take a week off and focus on getting the new season of the podcast running, which we will have ready for you next week. We'll return next week with our regularly scheduled podcast and some new designs and maybe some new additions to the lineup as well. Now, it'll still be Justin and I because, everybody that we've talked to have said that the content that we put out is something that they appreciate. So we're not messing with it too much. Just want to be, want to tell you that we're not messing with the format of the podcast too much just because you've asked us not to. And we're just adding a couple of little things that I think you will enjoy. All right. And then a quick word from our sponsor, Easy DMARC tonight. Easy DMARC, if you're not managing DMARC for your clients, you should be. Email deliverability has never been more important than it is today. That's how most businesses, especially small businesses that the MSP typically supports, does business. And so you want to make sure that your clients' emails are being delivered, and DMARC is part of that. And Easy DMARC, even though it says DMARC in the name, they don't just handle DMARC, they handle DKIM and SPF as well. So check them out. Sure, they'll be happy to give you a demo. And hey, just they're a great sponsor. They've been a sponsor of All Things MSP since we started doing sponsorships, and we really do appreciate their support. All right, on to tonight's topic. New year, new documentation, ending the tribal knowledge trap. One of the things I wanted to talk about was uh, trying to relate something to New Year's resolutions. And I think probably the best New Year's resolution for an MSP, if they haven't done it already, is to go ahead and create their documentation and their standard operating procedures. Now, some people will ask me, well, Eric, why is that so important? Well, first of all, ask yourself this question. Is your MSP's instruction manual currently living inside your lead tech's head? Now, that might be you, right? If you're the lead tech, if you're, the person doing most of the work. But if you want to grow, then you're going to have to get that information out of your head. Okay. Now, I know a lot of MSP owners this time of year, they are looking at growing. Okay. But one of the things you can't do effectively is you can't grow without order. You have to bring order to the chaos of doing things differently every single time. Also, you can't effectively hire people to scale your business without those standard operating procedures and processes written down and tested. Testing is a big part of your standard operating procedure because you might know how to do things and fill in the gaps of these instructions, but not everybody else is going to be able to do that. So one of the important things about documentation and standard operating procedures is going from chaos to order by creating those processes. Okay. It's not just documentation, it's also processes. But of course, along those lines, it is the documentation of those processes. Now, why do I think that getting organized is step one? Because it's your base layer, right? You've got to document the things you're doing, from how you do a sales presentation to the stacks that you're trying to sell. Any of those things could be, possible hiccups when it comes to running your business effectively. Now, that's why I think it's a great resolution to start with in terms of your your New Year's resolutions for your business, and especially if you haven't done these things in the past. Now, this is not just for people who haven't done it. I do have some tips in here for some of the things that you could go through and do to update your operating procedures and your documentation as well. So, first of all, a little bit of a reality check. Most MSPs that I've dealt with, including myself, when I was still an MSP, we had this tendency to kind of build the airplane while it was flying. This is one of my favorite kind of imageries to think about when things are moving so fast that you literally don't have time to build it, document it, and then go out and do it. A lot of times what you're doing is you're actually doing it and then documenting it later. Now, I think for a lot of situations, that's perfectly okay, because we're moving fast enough that you're getting things done, but you're not moving so slowly that you're spending all of your time designing, building, documenting before you actually do anything. And I think there's a balance between the two that you really need to make sure that you are doing things properly and still executing and getting things done at the same time. Because you're not going to generate any revenue until you actually start doing the work, until you start selling some managed services plans and you actually go out there and start doing it, onboarding and managing. And, hopefully you don't do this, but offboarding as well is one of those things that documentation really, really helps with, especially in reducing your risk and liability. So how do we do this? How do we move from chaos mode to system mode? Because that's really the key here. Is we're going from a modality where everything is kind of one-off, and that's one of the things that'll kill any kind of business. It doesn't matter if it's an MSP or not. If you're doing things one-off and you're having to reinvent the process every time, that is not good, because number one, it's going to take you longer every time. Number two, it's not repeatable. You can't give that to somebody and say, go do this and have them do it your way because they don't know what your way is. They don't think the way you do until you build your process into a system that they can then follow. And of course, that system has to be documented. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a document debt audit. Okay. We're going to check on a couple of things that you need to look at to see where some of your gaps are. Now, the first one is identifying gaps where your team is struggling the most. Now, a couple of very common ones here, onboarding, because it's a big process, right? And getting onboarding right is critical to that initial customer experience with a new customer or new client. Now, offboarding, we hope it never happens, but I'm putting it here as pretty important because if you don't offboard correctly, you can create a lot of risk for yourself. And that's one of the things we want to eliminate. And then alerts or I'll throw in tickets here as well. I think that you need a standard process for responding to alerts and processing tickets. And what I mean by that is that every time an alert comes in, there should be a process for, okay, this is the type of alert. This is how I check on this alert. And this is how I'm going to diagnose it and move it further, all of those things. So those are some of the things to look at. And if you have other things that your team is struggling with, I would go ahead and take a look at those as well. Now, the other one is the hit by a bus test. And I know this one, is kind of graphic. But if your top tech left today, what knowledge would leave with them? If any of your techs left today, what knowledge would leave with them? Now, this goes especially for obviously MSPs that have multiple techs or have that lead tech, right? Who has most of the knowledge, most of that tribal knowledge. And I think that this is one of those things where you can do some things culture-wise to help with this. And I'll get into those a little bit later. But you really want to make sure that you're building a culture where if anybody is unavailable for any period of time, right, that anybody else on the team knows where to go to get the information to solve that problem. And then PSA documentation cleanup. There's a couple of things here. Obviously, there are tools out there that you can use to store this documentation. I won't mention them by name because you can search for them easily, and they're not sponsors, and maybe that'll get them to sponsor. But PSAs, the Autotask, the ConnectWise, the Halo of the world. There's the possibility for creating and keeping documentation in there as well. But when you do that, you need to kind of do it in a methodical way. And so standardizing on your naming conventions, making sure that you're using some kind of maybe tags. I know some of the documentation platforms allow you to use tags. And so using those features to properly categorize and make sure that that documentation is searchable is important. Okay. So 3 things to think about: identifying the gaps, the hit by a bus test, and PSA/documentation cleanup. Okay. So those 3 are important as you're going through and doing this audit. And then the essential 5 SOPs, I'm going to call them. These are the 5 things that I think most MSPs should probably do first in terms of their ticket lifecycle, or sorry, their policies and procedures for their standard operating procedures for those basic things that we all have to deal with. So they are, sorry, my mouse went missing there for a second. New client onboarding. I mentioned it in the previous slide. It is probably the most important thing that you will do for clients. And getting all of that initial information into the system, at the very beginning is going to solve you a lot of problems, solve for a lot of problems later down the road. It's also going to show the client how thorough you are during the onboarding process. And it's going to give them a better client experience. And I think that client experience is hugely important, especially in the first 48 hours. I'll call it, it's not really the first 48 hours. It's however long your onboarding process takes. I was play on words there. Uh, the new client onboarding is that first experience that you're really going to have with them in terms of your service delivery. And that initial experience can have a lot to do with how the relationship starts. And that's what I think is important to hear. The better that relationship starts in the beginning, the better it's going to, launch into, hopefully, the next 10 years of them continuing to be a client. And then also there's a lot of just making sure things are straight in terms of configurations, making sure that, the backups are running, making sure that everything is running the way it should be, so that your service delivery hits that level that you've designed it to. And again, you can't replicate that process unless you have a procedure written down for everybody to follow. Now, next one is the perfect, and I did that in air quotes. See, air quotes. The perfect ticket life cycle. Okay. And this has a lot more to do with not how to take care of the individual problems, because there's a lot of those, and they come up. You could have, one is a problem with a switch, one is a problem with internet access, one is a problem with their QuickBooks application. Those are all going to be handled differently, but how they're handled in the ticket lifecycle, in terms of making sure the statuses are changed when the status actually changes, or how communication is going to happen in the PSA specifically, rather than by email or by phone. Or if there is a phone call, making sure that phone call is recorded inside of the ticketing system, inside of the PSA, so that all of that information is available to whoever else might have to pick up that ticket, whether it's going from tier 1 to tier 2, or whether somebody is coming off of shift and somebody else is coming back on shift, especially in the case where you have a 24/7 knock or sock, right? So document that perfect ticket life cycle. What do all of those procedures look like? And when should all of those different procedures be triggered along the life cycle of the ticket? All right, critical alert escalation. Who gets the 2 a.m. call? This is one of those things that once you get to a certain point, you don't need it till you get to a certain point, but once you get to that point, it's extremely critical to make sure you have a process around this critical alert escalation, to make sure, number one, that the alert goes to the right person. That person knows that they're on call, okay, and that they're the ones who have to deal with it. Because the worst thing that could happen is a critical alert comes in, 3 or 4 people get it, and they're like, oh, the other person has it. That's not a good way to play that game. If it's critical for a reason. And so you need to make sure that you have documentation on how that escalation is going to work, and who gets, who's on call, who's on first. I did it. I'm sorry. Okay, next, client offboarding. And again, this is about protecting your liability, right? There's a lot of things that can go wrong during an offboarding. And you want to make sure, my personal opinion about this is that you want to make sure that you are doing everything you can to make sure that your ex-client has everything that they need to successfully be onboarded by the next MSP, or to try and handle the things themselves to the best of their ability, right? What we want to do is make sure that there's no reason that they can come back to you and say, well, we didn't get this, we don't have access to this. You want to make sure that all of that stuff is handed off well to them. Because look, it's happened. MSPs have talked to me about it all the time. It happened to me a couple of times in my MSP, where we offboarded somebody, they went to another MSP, and 6 months later they were back, because they realized that we were actually doing the right things. and returning their calls when we were supposed to. And whatever that new MSP was promising them just didn't come to fruition. So you always want to leave yourself in the position of A, protecting yourself from liability by giving them everything you can to make sure they're offboarded well. And number two, make that offboarding experience good enough that if they have a problem with the new vendor, they will come back. All right. And then lastly, and I think this is probably the most critical internal SOP, and that is the new employee internal onboarding. And this means the onboarding of your employees, okay? Not the onboarding of the employees at a client, but the onboarding of your employees. Because number one, you have a service business, okay? And that service business means that you are doing things your way. You built your business by doing things your way. You built your business successfully and attracted the clients that you have and kept the clients that you have by doing it your way. And so it's important to have that internal onboarding process so that you make sure that your new hires are doing it your way. Now, there's always room for improvement, and I'm not saying your way is necessarily the right way. But when you're talking about a service business, there are certain things that you've done, the way you've done them, that have been attractive to the clients who have stayed with you, and you don't want to upset that apple cart. Okay. Now, if I was going to add a sixth one here, it would probably be employee onboarding of your clients, because that is probably, after the bigger new client onboarding, that is probably the second most, I would say, common long process that's going to happen, and process that needs to be done every single time the same way. That is going to happen with your clients once you've onboarded them. So I would add that as a mystery or bonus sixth SOP that you should definitely add to your stack. All right. And then making it stick, because this is one of the hardest things to do. Documentation is definitely not everybody's favorite thing to do. Okay. It just isn't. So what do you do to make it stick, make it a habit in your business? Well, I think that there's a couple of things you can do. I think, first of all, this is a culture problem, not a software problem. There are many tools out there for doing documentation. And like I said, a lot of your PSA tools do it just fine. If you need something bigger, more automated, maybe in terms of asset discovery, you could definitely, work with some of those. But it's the culture that's going to matter, not necessarily the tool, because the tool's not going to fix a bad habit, right? So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are building a habit in your business where people automatically, by default, do the right documentation, they record the right things in the ticket lifecycle and all of those things. So you can create, one of the ways to do this, and this is a little draconian, right, is no documentation, no credit rule. Okay. So you can incentivize the team to document as they go. And, there's a lot of different research out there where it takes, 30, 60, 90 days to do a habit. I read something recently, and I'm not remembering because this was not part of the presentation, but it's just coming to mind, where there's kind of three phases to a habit. There's where you start doing the habit, and that's the hardest part, right? And you've got to get through it. You've got to get, again, your process for whatever that habit is. And then the second part is kind of where you hit your stride. It's become easier, but it's not automatic. And then finally, last is where it just becomes automatic. And so what you want to do is probably create a period of time where you're incentivizing your techs to properly document. And by incentivize, I do probably mean dollars, right? I don't mean a pizza party. I mean incentivizing them individually, not as a team, to get their documentation done. Of course, this means you have to create reporting and be able to run some type of reporting against these processes, against these tickets, so that you can make sure that they are doing them correctly. And that's, kind of the key here is you want to make sure that you do this long enough, you're incentivizing it long enough to make it a habit. And once you create a habit with your initial set of technicians, when you onboard new technicians, it's already going to be the culture. So they're going to have, kind of all of these other people and some peer pressure in there to help them with this documentation and processes. Now, that's not to say that you can't run a quarterly contest to make sure that they are doing the right things, and you can incentivize that. But I would definitely, without a doubt, and we're talking, this is the beginning of the year, so one of the things you should be talking about, and maybe this will be next week's episode, because it's really important for this time of year to set expectations for their end of year reviews for next year. What are their goals? What are their KPIs? What are the things that they need to be working on? And documentation is absolutely one of those things. So, make it part of their annual goals to have a certain compliance percentage, let's call it, for their documentation or how well they follow their standard operating procedures. And now, to really do this right, you probably have to do, some type of auditing of how they're handling tickets. Now, if there are any vendors listening to this, I'm going to give this away for free, and maybe I'll develop it myself because it's probably that good of an idea. Has anybody built an AI tool for auditing tickets for SOP compliance? That would be an interesting one. And if you want more information, if you're a vendor out there and you want more to talk about that a little bit more, hit me up. Everybody knows how to reach me. But that's it. That's it for tonight. I just wanted to kind of point out some of those things that you could do to kind of make sure that you are doing the things that you need to do in order to document your processes and your standard operating procedures. I really do appreciate you guys joining me for this live stream tonight. I know I didn't put it up there for any questions, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. I'll probably stay on for a couple of more minutes just so that you guys can have the opportunity to ask questions if you do have any about standard operating procedures or documentation. But other than that, don't forget, like, subscribe, do all the things that you do on YouTube. If you're watching this on LinkedIn or on Facebook, go ahead and make sure that you are subscribed to the Facebook group. You're a member of the Facebook group. It's called All Things MSP, of course. And that's where we have a lot of the conversations around the material that we talk about on the podcast and on the live stream. So it's a great place to interact with your peers. And then, of course, check out the podcast. It's available on Spotify, Apple, pretty much everywhere that podcasts are sold. But that's about it for tonight. I don't see any questions in the chat box, so I'm going to go ahead and close it out for tonight. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Hey, thanks for watching All Things MSP Live. You can reach me, Eric Anthony, at eric@allthingsmsp.com. If you're a guest, if you're a vendor, if you want to sponsor the show, let me know.